I'll never forget the day the school lockdown turned into a nightmare. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon, and I was in the middle of my AP history class. We were discussing the nuances of the Cold War when the announcement came through the intercom. "Attention everyone, this is not a drill. Lockdown. Lock all doors and turn off all lights." Our teacher, Mr. Thompson, quickly moved to secure the classroom. He turned off the lights and pulled down the blinds. We all gathered in the back corner trying to keep quiet. There was an odd tension in the air. The usual chatter and shuffling of feet were replaced by an eerie silence. The only sound was our collective breathing and the occasional creak of the building settling. Minutes ticked by in heavy silence until we heard the first muffled thud, then another. It sounded like someone was banging on the doors of nearby classrooms. The noise grew louder, more frantic, and our fear escalated with each thud. Then came the shouting. It was a voice, disjointed and desperate, calling out unintelligible words. The voice seemed to be moving, searching for something or someone. Our hearts pounded as the banging intensified, this time directly against our classroom door. A student whispered, "What if it's him?" I could see the panic in everyone's eyes. Then, to our horror, we heard the door handle jiggling. The desperation in the voice grew, demanding to be let in. Some students began to cry while others looked around, helpless. The pounding eventually stopped, and the voice faded away. We sat in terrified silence, our faces illuminated by the dim light of a cell phone screen. The lockdown finally ended, and we learned that an armed individual had entered the school. He was later found hiding in the janitor's closet with a loaded weapon. The man was a former student, expelled years ago for aggressive behavior. He had a history of psychiatric problems and had been in and out of institutions. It turns out he had been planning to return to the school for months, holding a grudge against certain teachers and students he believed had wronged him. The realization that we had been so close to someone with such deep-seated anger and the knowledge that he had been targeting specific people left us all deeply disturbed. I later learned that he had been spotted multiple times in the weeks leading up to the incident, just watching the school from a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a rainy afternoon at Lincoln High when the lockdown alert was announced. I was working in the basement computer lab, a small isolated space with no windows and a single door that didn't lock properly. My two co-workers, Dave and Lisa, were upstairs, so I was alone when the announcement came through. I turned off the lights and sat quietly in the dark, trying to stay calm. I couldn't make any calls, and the only light came from my phone screen. After a while, I heard the basement door creak open, followed by footsteps approaching my office. My heart pounded as I crouched under my desk, trying to stay out of sight. The footsteps stopped outside my office door, and then I heard someone enter. The person didn't turn on the lights, and there was a tense silence. I tried to stay as still as possible, but my phone buzzed with a text message. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. Suddenly, the footsteps moved closer to me. I could feel the presence of someone standing just inches away. I decided to confront them, crawling out from under the desk and saying, "Who's there?" A man in a red plaid shirt emerged from the shadows saying, "It's okay, I'm just hiding. What's going on up there?" I explained that I didn't know much and asked him who he was. The man hesitated before saying he was a visitor who had come to pick up his child. He didn't seem to have any clear answers. I was about to tell him about the text I received from Dave when I looked up and realized something horrifying. The man's clothes were smeared with blood. My stomach dropped as I read Dave's text. "There's an armed man in the building. He's wearing a red plaid shirt. Don't come upstairs." The realization that the man standing before me was the very person Dave had warned me about sent me into a panic. I ran for the basement stairs, hearing a gunshot echo through the hallway behind me. I barely escaped as police officers arrived and apprehended the man. It turned out he had been a troubled parent with a history of violence, and the lockdown was triggered by a report of him threatening staff. He had been in the building with us all along. and the blood on his clothes was from an altercation with a staff member earlier. The experience left me deeply shaken, knowing that the threat had been so close and that the man's presence was part of a larger, more disturbing reality. My name is Ryan, and what happened during that lockdown at my high school was terrifying. It was during our afternoon classes when the lockdown alert went off. We were all in the science lab, working on a chemistry experiment. The announcement was short and tense. Lockdown. This is not a drill. Our teacher, Mrs. Klein, immediately locked the doors and turned off the lights. We were all moved to the corner, away from the windows. The room was silent, except for the sound of our breathing and the occasional drip from a leaky faucet. After a few minutes, we heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallways, slow and deliberate. They stopped right outside our door. We could see a shadow moving under the crack in the door, a figure just standing there. Then, we heard a faint scratching at the door, like someone trying to pick the lock. The handle jiggled, and we all froze. Whoever it was outside tried to push the door open, but stopped when it didn't budge. There was a heavy sigh, almost a growl, before the footsteps moved away. We sat there in terrified silence, waiting for the all clear. After what felt like an eternity, the lockdown was lifted. We were all shaken, but relieved that it was over. That was when the police arrived and informed us that they had found someone in the school, a man who wasn't supposed to be there. It turns out it was the janitor, Mr. Reed. He had been working at the school for over a decade, and everyone knew him as a quiet, unassuming guy. But recently, he had started behaving strangely, fixating on certain students, particularly one girl in our class. The truth came out in the days that followed. Mr. Reed had developed an unhealthy obsession with this girl, watching her from a distance, following her around the school. He had even found out her schedule and would coincidentally be nearby whenever she was alone. The most disturbing part was that Mr. Reed had been planning something for months. He had been using his keys to enter classrooms after hours, leaving small, unsettling notes in her desk. The girl had found them but didn't know who they were from. She thought it was a prank from another student. When the lockdown happened, Mr. Reed saw it as an opportunity. He had planned to lock himself in the same room as the girl, to finally be alone with her. But he didn't count on the fact that the teachers would act so quickly, securing the classrooms before he had a chance to reach her. The police found him hiding in a maintenance closet, clutching a small box. Inside were dozens of photos of the girl, taken without her knowledge, along with disturbing notes and plans for what he intended to do. The realization that this man, who had been a trusted figure at the school, had been harboring such dark intentions for so long was horrifying. The girl had no idea she was being watched, and that made the entire ordeal even more terrifying.